Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestle News 365. Hope everyone is doing very, very well. As always, there's a ton of news stories to get into, especially after the last night's excellent edition of NXT. So let's get into today's stories when it comes to the world of WWE. First of all, before we get into the Samoa Joe story, which you can see on the screen there, I must say, last night's edition of NXT was arguably the best episode of NXT I've seen in a really, really, really long time. Maybe the best ever since they've moved to the USA Network. Now, I know, obviously, there were some very good shows during the early days of them being on the USA Network there, when it comes to Finn Balor turning heel, or the episode where SmackDown and Raw invaded NXT. Those were all very good episodes, but certainly it's felt like for the longest time, we really haven't seen an episode as good as what we saw last night. The energy, the pacing, the matches, the storyline, matches that meant something, segments that meant something, everything was just absolutely fantastic last night of NXT. It must be said, it really truly was a very, very, very good episode of NXT, and certainly one with lots of ramifications, one being the return of Samoa Joe to NXT, the return of Samoa Joe to WWE in general. Obviously, we did do a reaction stream to that last night, so I won't go into it too much. If you want to see my immediate reaction to Samoa Joe's return to NXT last night, be sure to check it out. It's on the channel. But for those who did not see, Samoa Joe has indeed returned to NXT. Now, during last night's episode of NXT, William Regal opened up the show. He was very emotional. It looked like he was just about to resign as general manager of the black and gold brand. Out comes Karrion Kross, the NXT champion. He mocks William Regal, who at that point was openly weeping. He was crying. He says, "I told you you'd lost control, and I want you to say that Kross was right." He then mocks Regal, gets in his face. He goes, "Mr. Regal, are you crying?" Which I thought was just such a great line. He's saying, say it. Say Kross was right. Say it. I want to see you quit. I want to see you say that Karrion Kross was right. Out comes Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe confronts Karrion Kross. He says, "Mr. Regal, you wanted to speak to me." And Willie Regal says, "Well, yes, I did want to speak to you, just not out here in public. I wanted to speak to you behind the scenes, and essentially what I wanted to do is offer you the NXT general manager position." Samoa Joe says, "Nope, not doing that," turns it down, said, "I could never step into your shoes. I don't want to step into your shoes, but what I do want to do is get you the respect that you deserve from everyone here at NXT." Mr. Regal is interested in this proposition, says, "Okay, we can reach a compromise, but if that's the position you want to have, you can't be an active competitor, and you can't lay a finger on anyone unless you're physically provoked." So it's the Stone Cold Steve Austin storyline of when Steve Austin was the co-general manager of Monday Night Raw in 2003, when he was the general manager of Eric Bischoff, and he had just retired from professional wrestling after having his match against The Rock at WrestleMania 19. It's the same thing as that. Nobody can touch, you can't touch anyone unless you're physically provoked. It's the same situation. And we actually saw that in practice later on in the show, because backstage there was a big brawl, there was a big pull apart between Adam Cole and Kyle O'Reilly, and the situation was that whilst they were being pulled apart by NXT officials and referee, Adam Cole breaks free and shoves Samoa Joe, and Samoa Joe then, because he's been physically provoked, locks in the coquina clutch, sends Adam Cole to sleep. And then we saw the first actual bit of physicality, I guess, from Samoa Joe since 2020. Now, we didn't take any bumps. It was all very measured, because Samoa Joe obviously isn't yet cleared. That's very obvious at this point. He hasn't been medically cleared by WWE, or anyone for that matter. If he had been, I didn't even know if he would have returned to WWE. He might have gone to AEW where he could wrestle matches. He might have gone back to Impact. He might have just gone back to WWE. If he was cleared to compete, he'd be wrestling on Raw and SmackDown right now. So obviously he hasn't been cleared to compete, but I think the working agreement here, certainly if the reports are accurate, is that there is an openness by WWE and by Samoa Joe to maybe do matches down the line if Joe can get cleared. And there's certainly an openness to facilitate that and make that happen. So there will be continuing tests and an attempt to get Samoa Joe cleared and possibly have matches with people on the NXT brand. Certainly there were teasers, several teasers of opponents for Samoa Joe in the future last night on NXT. Obviously the obvious one on the screen there, you can see it being Karrion Kross. They had a face-to-face, a confrontation, and I think a lot of people said, wow, are we going to get Samoa Joe versus Karrion Kross at NXT TakeOver during SummerSlam weekend? I don't think it's as cut and dry as that at the moment. I don't even know, as I mentioned, Samoa Joe hasn't been cleared yet. Obviously, that is probably something that Joe wants. That's something that Kross wants. That's probably something that everyone in NXT wants. It's just a case of, is Joe going to be cleared? And obviously, the science and the medical situation will determine all of that. But certainly, that's something that NXT have begun to lay the foundations for, and maybe that does happen in the future. They also teased, I guess, a match with Adam Cole in the future by Joe sending Cole to sleep. Furthermore, they actually teased a match between Samoa Joe and Pete Dunne. Later on in the show, there was a moment where William Regal and Samoa Joe were walking out to the parking lot, and they were about to be interviewed, and they just cut to Tommaso Ciampa or Timothy Thatcher, and I think it was a botch because when they came back from commercial, they had to essentially do it again, but in a different setting. This time, they're in William Regal's general manager's office. In comes Johnny Gargano and Austin Theory, and Joe says, "Oh, Johnny, leave." Makes him leave, but then in comes Pete Dunne, and the Bruiserweight and the Samoan Submission Machine have a face-off again, laying down the foundation that something could happen for the future. So I thought it was excellent. Obviously, it makes NXT far more must-see, and it makes a really interesting dynamic, and certainly does open up the door for potentially Samoa Joe to have more matches in the future as part of the NXT brand. Whether or not that happens, like I said, is going to be determined on whether or not he can get cleared. And only time will tell if that's actually going to happen or not. But it was great to see him. And as I mentioned, the show just in general for me last night was just far more watchable than really any episode of NXT has been for a really long time. A really, really long time at this point. Sometimes those shows just felt boring. And again, it's no disrespect to the talent. It's no disrespect to the creative. There was something missing. NXT lost its identity over the course of the Wednesday Night Wars, the pandemic, the move to 2 hours. There was just something not there that was there previously. That energy, that rawness, that excitement, that pacing, it was just there. Again, it just felt boring. And I don't know if they found it last night, but it certainly was far, far more enjoyable to watch. Far more enjoyable to watch. I think having fans back inside the Capitol Wrestling Center really does play a part in that. And obviously, they've had fans inside the Capitol Wrestling Center for a while, but certainly not on this scale. NXT TakeOver in your house this past weekend was the most fans they've ever had in there. I don't know if it was the same number last night on NXT on the USA Network, but it just felt more important. It felt far more important, far more, again, just enjoyable. It had such a great atmosphere, and everything just hit. And that can't happen every week. Of course, there are going to be some misses. But it did just feel so much more important and so much more must-see television than that just hasn't been associated with NXT for a while at this point. Now, another great segment last night was LA Knight attacking Ted Dibiase. Now, the new $1 Million champion, LA Knight, turned on WWE Hall of Famer, the $1 Million Man, Ted Dibiase, during last night's edition of NXT. Now, we saw Dibiase host an official $1 Million coronation ceremony for LA Knight, who, of course, won the championship this past Sunday, defeating Cameron Grimes in a ladder match at NXT TakeOver in your house. Now, the segment largely had LA Knight praising Dibiase, talking about how Dibiase had played such an instrumental part in his life and his career ever since being a child. But LA Knight had this tremendous line where he's looking at the championship and he says, "Now that I have everything that I want, it's time to drop what I don't need." And then bang, hits Ted Dibiase with a right hand and follows that with some boots. And then out comes Cameron Grimes to, by the way, a tremendous reception, a real tremendous reception from those inside the Capitol Wrestling Center. Cameron Grimes is over. Cameron Grimes is super, super over. So he came out, chased off LA Knight, and came to the aid of Ted Dibiase. So this feud between LA Knight and Cameron Grimes is looking to continue. But one of my big takeaways from this segment last night, well, there was a couple, but one of my big takeaways was that, one, Cameron Grimes is super over. And for 18 months, because of the pandemic, because of not having crowds, because of having the Thunderdome, because of having piped-in audio, all that kind of stuff, it's really difficult to determine who's over and who's not. And I look at someone like Cameron Grimes and I say, is this a guy that you would have this kind of push? Would you have that in the pandemic era? And I think the answer is no, he wouldn't. I don't think he would. But seeing that reaction that he got last night, you can tell that guy's popular, and that guy, pun intended, can go to the moon. And it's having that crowd in there, that emotion, that pop, that reaction is such a great indicator that we haven't had for a while. Now, I must say, LA Knight, in my opinion, I don't think he's long for the NXT brand. I really don't. I said before, I find it staggering it's taken this long for him to get a featured spot in WWE because he's Vince McMahon's dream. He has everything Vince McMahon looks for. He has the look, he has the ability on the mic, he's got the in-ring work, he's got the catchphrases, he looks $1 million. I mean, it's everything. It really is everything. So I wouldn't be surprised if Vince McMahon takes one look at NXT and goes, who's that guy? I want him on Monday Night Raw or Friday Night SmackDown. So I wouldn't be surprised if LA Knight's not long for NXT. Another thing I will say, credit to Ted Dibiase, because this is a guy in Ted Dibiase that he retired from in-ring competition in the early 90s? By the mid-90s, he was a manager. He decided to retire. He's had multiple, knee surgeries. I think he might have had a knee replacement as well. This is a guy, again, hasn't been doing anything physical for a real long time. And the right hand he took from LA Knight was one thing, but the bump The bump that he took last night was fantastic. I mean, talk about a bump. This wasn't a bump like sometimes you see it with Hall of Famers where it's a punch to the gut, drop to the knees, go down, or something like that. This was a bump, flat back, arms out. He took a bump. He took a legit bump. So credit to Ted Dibiase. I mean, he's always a great worker during the 80s and all that. But man, what a bump that was by Ted Dibiase. Credit to him. Absolute credit to him. And I really enjoyed the segment. I thought it was tremendous. Now, speaking of NXT as well, we're finally going to have the reveal of what this Diamond Mine vignettes have all been about over the course of the last, months? It's been a while, hasn't it? These Diamond Mine vignettes have been airing on NXT television. We're going to find out next week because the Diamond Mine is said to be, quote, opening next week. That's what the vignette said last night on NXT. Now, it's been really strange because you get the impression, don't you? You really do truly get the impression that WWE or NXT have gone back and forth on this a little bit. Because these Diamond Mine vignettes, as I mentioned, have been airing for a real long time. And they've been really intermittent. Like, they've been there, and then they just disappear for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then they come back, and then they disappear. Well, finally, we got an indication last night they're going forward with it, and it's going to debut next week. Now, what it is, we don't know. There were rumors about Tessa Blanchard, and there was killer reports on that saying, no, it's not Tessa Blanchard, but people don't know what it is. The plans for this one are being kept very close to the vest. No one truly knows what this is. Now, there's been lots of predictions, as I mentioned. Tessa Blanchard, I don't think it is, frankly. Given the fact that it's not just been the diamond. The diamond initially was obviously a big part of it, but then subsequently we've seen it's more of an MMA kind of thing. And the vignettes have been focused around MMA and mixed martial arts in a training gym and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's Tessa Blanchard. And all the reports are saying that that's not the case. So what is it? Well, could be obviously just a new wrestler. There's plenty of them at the Performance Center, so it could just be a wrestler with an MMA background. Could be a new faction. As I mentioned, there's plenty of wrestlers under contract at the Performance Center that have a background in mixed martial arts or professional sports, so who's to say it's not a new faction? Debuting in NXT, we've got a couple of them in there right now in terms of factions, but could be another one. Diamond Mine is a great faction name, so I'd be interested in that. I think another thing, which has been speculated on, this could be NXT's equivalent of Raw Underground, or their version of Bloodsport, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, Bloodsport and Raw Underground were kind of hybrids of MMA and pro wrestling, and not having ring ropes, not having ring posts. Raw Underground was a ripoff of Bloodsport, by the way, but that's what that was. So maybe this is NXT's version. Maybe NXT look at that and say, well, we can do something like that as well. But instead of it being on just the blank canvas, they do it inside of a gym. I don't know. There certainly is a possibility, but no one really knows, and that's not a bad thing. It's a reason to watch next week and have a look to see what it might be. So I'm excited to see that. Let's move to Monday Night Raw, talk about the Raw ratings as we head into Hell in a Cell on Sunday. Now, Monday's Hell in a Cell go-home edition of Raw, featuring the final Red Brand build for Sunday's pay-per-view, plus the heavily hyped return of Eva Marie, drew an average of 1.742 million viewers on the USA Network. This is according to Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics. Now, this is up 6.2% from last week's 1.640 million viewers. Now, this week's Raw drew a 0.49 rating in the key 18 to 49 demographic. This is up 2% from last week's 0.48 rating in the key demographic. Now, as I mentioned, this week's Raw audience was up from recent weeks and up 6.2% from last week. The 18 to 49 demographic was the best key demo rating since the May 10 show. But it's still not all good for WWE and Monday Night Raw because Raw is still down 10% from the same week in 2020, while the key demographic was down 7.6% from the same week in 2022. So look, WWE can say, look, it's up. We've risen in terms of the ratings. We've risen in terms of the viewership. It's still not good. This is still Monday Night Raw. This is still your flagship broadcast, even though SmackDown is really the A show, the A brand nowadays because it's on Fox. But it's still your flagship broadcast. And if you're celebrating 1.7 million viewers, it's not good enough. Triple H was obviously very prickly, wasn't he, on that NXT media call last week, saying if you don't want to watch it, if you don't like it, don't watch it. Well, no one is watching it. That goes for NXT, Raw, and lesser for SmackDown, but certainly for WWE in general. And we go back, don't we, to that promo he did on Raw, which was 2014, something like that, when he talks about his friend Mark, and he's not happy, and he's going to send out a tweet, and yet he's going to tune in next week and next week and next week. That show was watched by an average of 4 million viewers, over 4 million viewers. Now it's 1.7. Well, I think Triple H and his friend Mark have stopped watching. Like a lot of people, because the show isn't very good. It's 3 hours, it's a bore, Raw is bore, let's run it back, rematch Raw. And again, as I've mentioned over and over again, The general excuse at this point seems to be, wait until we return to touring. Wait until we return to touring. Wait until SummerSlam. Oh, we got so much planned for touring. We got so much planned for SummerSlam. But they'll continue to go down because the show's bad, because the show's not good. We see it all the time. There's always an excuse. Oh, wait for something. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Oh, no, we've got this grand plan. Something big's coming. And then next year it goes down. This time last year, we were still in the Performance Center. I don't know if we had the NXT Performance Center recruits at this point. I think we did. But back then it was wait until we get to the Thunderdome. Oh, it's going to be so much better and the ratings are going to go back up. They go down every year because they've got nothing new. They're out of tricks at this point. So we'll see the same thing every single week. Now, speaking of Raw, of course, we had Piper Niven make her main roster debut with Eva Marie on Monday Night Raw. Now, after she made her debut this past week, social media, unfortunately, was flooded with messages and comments criticizing the former NXT UK superstar for being overweight. Now, several WWE superstars have since come to the defense of Piper Niven. Mia Yim tweeted, quote, "The body shaming is disgusting. You're bold behind the screens. It costs nothing to be kind." NXT North American champion Bronson Reed said he could relate to Niven due to his own experience dealing with body shaming. He said, quote, "This happens to me every time I'm on screen. Don't worry about the haters. They can stay hating. We keep shining." Nash Carter, one half of the NXT Tag Team Champions, said the body shamers could never put a dude through a wall like Reed. Charlotte Flair also retweeted Yim's post and seemed to agree with the message. Now, this is just social media, unfortunately. These are the people that they thrive on people's misery. They thrive on making people unhappy because ultimately, these people that post these messages, these people that like to say these things are very unhappy themselves. So they hope and they want to see other people be unhappy. And it's not right and it's not fair. And they see Piper Niven on their television screen, and instead of being able to relate to someone like Piper Niven or being to relate to anyone on television, because guess what? Not everyone looks alike. Not everyone has the same body type. Not everyone has the same body shape. Everyone's unique, and surely should we be celebrating that? But no, we'd rather have everyone look the same and conform to being the same. You know, there's so much in the word diversity. Everyone's different. Everyone's diverse. But people can't handle that. People can't handle that. And people ultimately, like I said, want people on the television, on screen, people that are successful. They want them to be just as unhappy as they are, because that makes them, for a split second, feel better about themselves. Well, ultimately, look, and I don't want to get too much into social media and policy about social media, but we've got to get to a point, obviously, when it comes to any kind of abuse, when it comes to, whatever kind of abuse, we've got to get to a point where to open up a social media account, you have to share, your ID or whatever, because when people can say all kind of messages, they can then get held responsible for them. That's the only way around all this kind of stuff. But it's unfortunate to see. The only positive is that we are seeing people come together and back Piper Niven about this. That's the good thing. Speaking of NXT, former Impact Wrestling star Christian Blake made his debut on NXT last night. Now known as Trey Baxter, Baxter answered the latest open challenge issued by NXT Cruiserweight Champion Kushida. After a back-and-forth match, Kushida ended up retaining the title via the hoverboard submission. Baxter is former indie star Blake Christian. It was noted back on June 3rd that his name change was revealed after the roster update on the Performance Center website. WWE also recently filed a trademark for the Trey Baxter name on May 26th. As I mentioned, he's been working for several promotions. He's worked for Impact Wrestling as recently as earlier this year. He's part of the Super X Cup tournament, New Japan Strong, GCW, among others. I thought the match was excellent, the match last night with Kushida. I like this Cruiserweight Open Challenge is actually a way of introducing new talent to the promotion. I think that's a lot of fun. And Triple H was also seemingly impressed with Baxter's debut. He said, quote, an impressive debut, a fighting champion. So I think we're going to see far more of Trey Baxter going forward in Impact Wrestling, not in Impact, in NXT. And that's exciting because I'm a big fan of his work and I have been for a long time. Speaking of NXT, we have a match announced for NXT's Great American Bash, which of course is going to be taking place in 3 weeks' time. And it's going to be Adam Cole versus Kyle O'Reilly. As I mentioned, there was a brawl backstage between Cole and O'Reilly, which resulted in Samoa Joe choking out Adam Cole after he was physically provoked. And William Regal said, I said that you would have an unsanctioned match. Obviously, that's not enough. So you're going to be facing each other in a regular match in 3 weeks' time at the Great American Bash. Look, the match is going to be fine. The match is going to be very good. I just don't really get it. I must say, I really don't get it. That wasn't the whole point. That was the main event of NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver Night 2. It was the main event of the NXT TakeOver on WrestleMania weekend, or WrestleMania week. That was the big match. That was the blow-off in this feud. It was an unsanctioned match because we can't control. We don't want to be held liable as to what happens to either one of you. But we do want to be held liable now at the Great American Bash. It just seems like a massive step backwards. They tried to put some logic in this one, but it was completely illogical. It must be said. We're going to have you in an unsanctioned match because we don't want to be held liable. Who knows what could happen? And we don't want to get sued or anything like that. A few weeks later, you're still brawling. Okay, regular match, so we can get sued. Where's the logic there? It's completely illogical. And no disrespect, we've seen the match before. The match was very good. The match was long at NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver Night 2, but obviously the match is going to be very good. And I'm excited to see it. But the logic behind it is, well, there isn't any. It was very confusing. I really did not understand the logic behind that at all. Finally, let's talk about SummerSlam, because SummerSlam, of course, is on the horizon. WWE heavily promoting it, and a significant amount of WWE SummerSlam tickets were reportedly sold in the pre-sale that began on Monday. Now, fans can use the code PSL to access the current pre-sale, but the main pre-sale kicks off on Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So that would be right now, actually, at the time of recording. You could use the code TWEETS for that pre-sale. Tickets will then go on sale for the general public on Friday morning. Now, it remains to be seen how many tickets were released in the pre-sale on Monday, but at least several thousand tickets were sold. At one point, there were more than 2,000 people waiting in the Ticketmaster queue. Ticketmaster also listed the current capacity at 41,661, and that number is for the full event, not the number of tickets released for the pre-sale, which is certainly interesting, of course, because the general consensus was that there was going to be no restrictions on this SummerSlam event and there was going to be 70,000 people there. Now they're saying 41,000. So obviously something's changed, maybe in terms of the local state's guidelines for mass gatherings during the pandemic. I don't know. I think probably as we get closer, things will probably open up a little bit more and more tickets will be released. But either way, I fully expect this event to near enough sell out. Given the fact that WWE is tapping into all resources, given the fact it's taking place in Vegas, it's a summer destination, as they have called it, I expect the event to sell out. Especially if it's 41,000, I fully expect them to sell out. If it gets to 70, that's a bit more debatable. But time will only tell if we get to that point. I don't know if we will. Again, time will only tell. So, exciting. And as we get closer to SummerSlam, more matches, I guess, are going to be announced. But look, guys, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all of these WWE news stories we've spoken about today? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. It really does help us out here on YouTube, gut the rankings, and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.